Hello, my friends. I thought that I might start doing something that I haven't done before, which is unpacking a concert after I go to a concert. And I went to a concert last night. First of all, I'm tired. So a little cherry Coke, because sugar and caffeine are super good for you when you're 43. But I could be doing worse things. Last night, my wife and I went to a fantastic concert at the South Side Ballroom in Dallas, Texas. This concert had 5 bands, started just after 6 p.m. I was about to say 6 a.m. Started just after 6 p.m. Opened with a band called SULLVN. Now, this is a band I really didn't know anything about, to be fair. Other than right before the concert, like a couple days before the concert, I was kind of trying to look up the band. I usually, getting ready to go to a concert, I will build a playlist of music by the bands that are at the concert so I can be listening to it to hype myself up for the show. And I could not find SULLVN's music, and the reason was I was misspelling their name, which, lame. It's SULLVN, but so I didn't really know much about them going into it, other than that I had read that their horn players had been the horn players for No Doubt back in the sort of pre-Tragic Kingdom days. So that was cool, but they are a relatively new band. They're being produced by John Feldman from Goldfinger. They have written a couple of songs with Dickie Barrett from Mighty Mighty Boss Stones. And that was, I didn't even know all of that going into the show. But I will say they sounded great. They were vibey. They had like a chill kind of atmosphere to their show, but it was fun. It was, rock and roll. It was overall a very, very enjoyable performance. And the surprise part of their show, I'm already jumping into the show. I haven't even talked about the stuff around it. Maybe I'll finish with all the stuff around the show that made the show great. But the surprise part of their performance was that Dickie Barrett showed up. And for someone like me who really did not listen, if you've been on the channel for a while, you know that my background is I came from the Christian rock scene. And so though I did listen to ska back in the 90s, primarily I was listening to Christian ska bands like the Supertones, the Insiders, Five Iron Frenzy, some of the Squad 5-0 music, the Dingees music, and then compilations like Skanktified, which was like 30, ska bands, some of which were good and some of which were decidedly not good. But that's pretty much the ska scene I was exposed to. I knew of some other bands. I heard Superman when I played Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. But I didn't really know a ton of the non-Christian ska scene. And it wasn't until like just before COVID that I started creating the Rudie Librarian. And I said, I kind of miss ska. I'm going to dive deeper into the non-Christian ska that I missed. And I found this whole world of like older bands and newer bands. And the Rudie Librarian was born out of that. So for someone like me, that was a big aside in the middle of this explanation of the concert, it's not super likely that I'll see the Boss Tones perform. Obviously they're broken up at this point. There's some deep disagreements over values with the band and Dickie Barrett. And so it was kind of cool to get to hear a couple songs sung by Dickie. Even I think if you aren't a fan of his, the Boss Tones probably had some impact on you at some point. So that was cool. It was cool to hear those songs and see him perform. I will say his voice, he has a rough voice. He's known for having a rough voice. He sounded rougher than usual. But the band SULLVN sounded great, and I really look forward to the stuff that they have coming in the future. I think there's a lot of great stuff on the way. So they played, really they were the first opener of 5, so it was a real short set, like 30 minutes. And then after them, the second band was Zebrahead. Now, I have heard of Zebrahead, and I realized I had heard a couple of their songs, but I really didn't know them very well. And I think the songs that I had heard of theirs were from back in the day of downloading music illegally from like Kazaa and LimeWire and things like that. They were great. You know, they have this dual vocalist kind of thing going on. Um, you know, it's interesting being at a show where the Aquabats are going to play. So you've got all these families that are bringing their kids. Um, and then you have a band like Zebrahead, who it felt like to some degree was like kind of making a point of using profanity. And so I think that there was a part of me as like a dad that I was a little like, oh, these kids, some of these kids are being exposed to things that, you know, words that they shouldn't. But it's a punk rock show. It's a ska show. So it is what it is, you know. I think as a parent, you also have to prepare your kids and be like, hey, they're going to use some words you can't use. But Zebrahead sounded great. They were fun, high energy, great, you know, songs. There's several songs that I was like, I'm going to go listen to this song more because I really enjoyed it. There was a song, and I'll probably get the name of the song wrong, but it was something like All Our Friends Are Nobodies, that I really dug that they performed. The energy was incredible. They, you know, got the pit going. They crowd surfed. It was really fun. And they were a great band. And there's a singer who just sings, and he was kind of the more like screamy kind of vocals, rougher vocals. And then there was a, you know, guitarist or bass player. I was kind of far away, so it was hard to tell which was which. Who was had this really great kind of beautiful voice. And so I always love when there's that sort of dynamic. You know, it's almost like Blink-182 where, you know, Tom has like a really unique voice, and then Mark has like a really like traditionally great singing voice. And there's something great about both of those voices, and something really great when you bring them together. And I think that's something that was true about Zebrahead as well. So for not having listened to them before, I'm a fan, and I look forward to hearing more of their music. The third band that came up was Unwritten Law, and I knew some Unwritten Law. Of course, I knew Seeing Red. I'm a fan of the movie Grind, and there's obviously a really special scene in that movie that features that song, and I had grown up hearing that song a lot, and I was surprised because they did that song like pretty early, kind of into the early mid part of the set, and that's something that I would have assumed they might have ended with because it's pretty much their biggest song. But their whole set was really good. Again, there's something about the vibe of this band that is just a fun, pleasant performance. I mean, it's rock and roll, so there was great pits, there was great crowd surfing, there was, you know, some shredding and that kind of stuff, but it also just had like a vibe to it that was chill and enjoyable. And I will say for the first three bands, I think that there were some real sound issues, specifically with the vocals. The microphones were cutting in and out a little bit. The mix was a little bit weird. And I mean, that's not uncommon for the mix for an earlier band to be less full, and then you kind of like expand that sound on the headliners. To some degree, I don't like that. I want every band I hear at a show to sound as good as we can possibly make them sound. And I thought the three bands did a really good job, but I thought that there was some issues with the sound, which were a little disappointing for those first three bands. But ultimately, I really enjoyed all three of them. I thought they did a great job. So then we get to the headliners, the reason we were there for the show. And that was the Aquabats and Goldfinger. And for the Aquabats, I got to say, I feel like more people were at this show for the Aquabats than for anyone else. And I've never been to an Aquabats or Goldfinger show. These are two big bands I've been really wanting to see. I had tickets to the Aquabats before COVID. They were supposed to do a co-headlining tour with Real Big Fish, and it ended up getting canceled. And so to be able to finally see them was outstanding. It was so exciting. I had hoped to bring my kids, but my kids have some sensory concerns, and I think that they were concerned they were going to feel really overstimulated and it was going to be too loud for them, too crowded. So they didn't want to go, but my wife and I went, and it was great. It was so fun to see, one, just the high energy, the craziness of an Aquabats show. Like from the very first note, they unleashed like 4 giant inflatable sharks into the audience. They sang, their pizza song. They unleashed two giant slices of pizza, inflatable pizza, into the audience. They sang, a pool party song, and they threw a bunch of big beach balls into the audience. And there were people crowd surfing, and I don't know that you really get into a circle pit or anything at an Aquabats show, but it was just a fun time. A lot of people dancing, a lot of people having a good time, and it was really fun to see the little kids that were there for the Aquabats get to see this band that they loved. And I'm going to talk more about the audience here a little bit later, but the Aquabats were amazing. They started out, in like, Western ponchos and hats, and man, I would put the Aquabats near the top of my list of bands I've seen live now. They were so good, and it was such a fun show. And then Goldfinger came on, and so I like Goldfinger. I know that their last three albums have not been like necessarily everyone's favorites, but I've really enjoyed their last three albums, and I got into them obviously with the last three albums. I mean, I know some of their older music for sure, but it's been since they put out their last three albums that I've really been following them. So, also as a fan of MXPX, that's when Mike started playing bass with them full time, and so being able to see him there, I've always loved MXPX because they are so high energy. Like Mike and Tom and the whole band, they are jumping so high, and I was looking it up, and Mike at this point is like 49 years old, right? Just a few months younger than my wife. My wife turns 50 in April. He'll turn 50 in November. John Feldman, the lead singer and one of the guitarists for Goldfinger, is 58 years old, and the energy, I'm 43, the energy that this 49-year-old and 58-year-old and the rest of the band are putting out there is insane. It's so crazy to me, and I'm like, I need to be getting in shape the way they're getting in shape, because I couldn't have lasted 5 minutes with the kind of energy they were doing. They played some of our favorite songs. Every song sounded fantastic. It's Real Big Fish's horn section that's playing with them right now, and that sounds great. And so it was a great show. Every bit of the show was more than I could have possibly asked for, and I'm so glad that I went. I struggle with crowds, to be fair. I don't like crowds very much, and but I love concerts, and those things don't usually go together. So there are a lot of times where I'm like, I'm going to go to this show, and I buy tickets, and the day before the show, the day of the show, I'm like, oh man, why did I do this? I don't really want to go be in a crowd. I don't really want to be up this late. I don't want to stand for 5 hours. I just get in my head about all these things, and it makes me want to sell my tickets or just ditch and not go. But then when I go, I'm almost always so glad that I went. And this was an example of that. I was so glad that I went. And I want to talk about the crowd a little bit too. So if you're like me and you grew up in the 90s, you've been to a lot of like mixed bills where you might have like a punk band, a ska band, a hardcore band, an emo band, all of this stuff, an indie band, all of this stuff just mixed together. And that can be really fun, right? But it made me think about the scenes. So being a fan of punk rock, and also being a fan, really the Christian punk scene, there were a lot of times when I was growing up where I would hear from the punk scene, there's no such thing as Christian punk, because punk is against authority and Christianity is the authority. It's all about authority. And then I would hear from Christian people, there's no such thing as Christian punk, because punk is all about rebellion and bad behavior, and Christianity is all about like submission and good behavior. And the truth is, one, that's such an oversimplification of both of those things. But two, you could tell me there's no such thing as Christian punk, but I was listening to Christian punk bands, And a lot of these bands have gone on to get a lot of positive attention, a lot of positive support. Bands like MXPX, Slick Shoes, Reliant K, the Huntingtons, Goaty Hook, Too Bad Eugene, Craig's Brother, Squad 5-0 had some punk and ska albums. You know, there's just a lot of, and I could go on. There's obviously a lot more bands than that, but I always felt like the punk scene could be the best and the worst, right? It could be very exclusive at times, very like gatekeepery. That's not punk. This is punk. You know, no, Blink-182, Green Day. That's not punk. Real punk is, you know, old school punk. It's maybe you're thinking it's the Sex Pistols or the Ramones, or maybe you're thinking it's bands like the U.S. Bombs, or you know, whatever. And to me, there's room for all of those things. And now, especially where everybody that's listening to music has listened to so many different genres growing up, and they've mixed their love of these genres. So you're going to see things that are, you know, punk, but that also have all these other influences from other genres. And that's fine. That's okay. That's good. You know, music grows. Same thing with the emo scene. Emo scene can be very, at times, very very gatekeepery. Like, that's not emo, this is emo, you know. There's a whole website, is this band emo, where you can type in the name of a band and it will tell you whether that band's emo or not. And I mean, it's with emo, maybe it's a little bit more complicated, because emo is really just meant to mean emotional, and all music's emotional, and we get into that whole Ian MacKaye, like, emo's a stupid label. But there is a genre there, and multiple waves of that genre that we can love, right? And I don't want to act like the ska scene doesn't have issues with gatekeeping at time, because it does. In a lot of different ways. There are newer artists that think that we should forget all the old artists. There are old artists that say the new stuff isn't ska. It can be gatekeepery too. But for me, one of the things I love about the ska scene is the ska scene is one of the most inclusive scenes I've ever seen. And I don't just mean inclusive of diversity, which obviously that's true, but I mean, and if you've watched the documentary for Pick It Up, Ska in the 90s, which I love, I think it's a great documentary, it talks about this some, but you go to a ska show and you're going to see people in suits and ties. You're going to see people in black and white checkers. You're going to see people in you know, basically the same outfit as a punk show. You're going to see people in weird costumes, like someone dressed up as a banana, or someone dressed up in like a full like morph suit, you know, like black and white checker morph suit. These are common things. And last night at the show, it was such an example of that, you know, especially with the Aquabats being there. You had people dressed in the Aquabats costume. You had people dressed as characters from the Aquabats show. You had people dressed in black and white checkers. You had people dressed in more like suits. You had people, you know, wearing, you know, more punk outfits. It was all of that stuff. You had children up to people that are 20 years older than me at the show. And that to me was such a beautiful, wonderful thing. And beyond that, you had the supportiveness of the people in the scene, people trying to make sure that the person next to them was having a good time. My wife is pretty short. She's 4'10.5". And so we stood kind of outside of the main performance area over near one of the bars where there was a rail that we could kind of lean against, and we were a little bit elevated. And so Michelle could definitely see the stage a little bit better. And I didn't have to feel so kind of confined as well, which was nice, because being a bigger guy and someone who struggles with crowds, I can feel a little overwhelmed sometimes in the middle of a crowd. And there was this family next to us for a good portion of the show where this dad had his little girl who had to be no older than kindergarten for sure, probably a little younger than that, and then had a son who was probably in middle elementary. And he was holding his daughter for a good portion of the show and would come over when he needed a break and kind of rest her up on the rail. And everyone around them would kind of move to make sure that they had room so he could set his daughter down, because we wanted him and his daughter to have a good show, you know? And to me, that's just a sign of what's so great about the ska scene. One more story, well, and then a couple more details, and then I'll wrap up. This is getting to be a long video, but in the line going into the show, there was a ton of people wearing MXPX shirts, Aquabats shirts, Goldfinger shirts. I didn't see a lot beyond that, but that was really what I was primarily paying attention to, since those were the bands I was there to see. And of course, I'm a lifelong MXPX fan. But the guys that got in line behind me, there was a couple of young black men, and I'm pretty sure that they were brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. And the younger brother was dressed in an Aquabats rash guard and the helmet, and I don't remember if he had the mask on or not, but he had the helmet and he had the rash guard, and there was just this sweet love between these brothers. And the younger brother, I would say, was very likely on the spectrum. You know, I don't know him, and I can't, I'm sort of judging based on appearances, but he's very likely on the spectrum. And the older brother was, you could tell, not only loving of his younger brother, but also very protective. And I just loved seeing this younger brother there in his Aquabats costume. And so at one point I turned around and I said, "Man, I really love your outfit." And he just lit up. And his older brother, it felt like kind of relaxed a little bit, because you never know what someone's going to say if you have a family member who's got special needs. And it could be very mean, I'm sure. But he was very happy to hear us compliment his brother, and his brother was very happy to hear that we loved his outfit. And then we asked, have you seen them before? And he said, yeah, he had seen them 2 times. And I was so thrilled that this kid was going to come and get to enjoy this show with his brother. It was such a special thing to see. So that made me very, very happy. The one last thing I want to say that I love about the ska scene, and really this is probably any scene that you're deeply a part of, but I was so pleased to run into so many people that I enjoy, either online or in real life. The first person that I saw when we got to the show, sitting on these steps as we were passing by to go up, was the Lucha Librarian. And they were on the phone, so I didn't want to interrupt them. But later I saw them when I was in line for merch, and we got to say hi. And I'm a big fan of them. And of course, we librarians have to support one another, right? So that was very cool to see. Then I saw in line, just a couple people behind me in the merch line, a good friend Jamie, who I went to middle school with. And when I decided to take that deep dive into ska just before COVID, and I knew that I had missed so much ska from all those years, and I really wanted to know a lot more about it, Jamie was one of the people who had stayed a fan of ska and could recommend some stuff for me, and has been so encouraging as I've been kind of doing the Rudie Librarian thing. So it was really cool to see her face-to-face. Haven't seen her face-to-face probably since junior high or high school, and meet her husband, Don, who seems like a really great guy. And then I also saw the Bryant, who's a fixture in the local ska scene, the ska aficionado. Saw him as well, in passing. I don't think he saw me. I saw him. But it's so fun to see these people that you love at the ska show having a good time. Overall, it was a fantastic show. We came home tired. We are, normally in bed much, much earlier. But what a great show. And got my Goldfinger shirt on today because the love of the concert continues after the show ends. So this is my relatively long, wrapping up of the show. But I hope that you guys, if you went, had a great time like I did. At this point, I think probably the next ska show I'm hoping to go to is Millington, who's supposed to be here at a venue I've never been to, I think in May. And love Millington. I've had them on the podcast. If you haven't seen that episode or listened to that episode, go check it out. And I hope that I'll see you at the ska show.